Yeah, my name's Phil, project manager at Dyfed Archaeological Trust. So we're going to stay at Pembroke Castle, but come up to the surface, fast forward a few thousand years into the late medieval period. So in September, for a couple of weeks, we ran an excavation in the castle. Helped out by a fantastic group of volunteers, and I see a few of them here today. Hi Gaina, hi Geraint, Sandra, hi. And all with funding and great assistance from the Pembroke Castle Trust. I'm Phil, myself and Tom Jameson were supervising on site, but Neil Ludlow was giving us expert advice, and he's very much the brains behind this scheme. So I say that partly to temper the questions at the end. So to run through very quickly, because talking about Pembroke Castle will be a whole talk in itself, so I'm afraid I have to skip through the history of things really quickly, because I've overrun terribly in my preparations for this, but essentially what you have here is Pembroke Castle, so founded in the late 11th century. What you mostly see here is a product of the sort of mid-13th century and restoration works, sympathetic restoration works in the 1930s. So at the top end there you have the high status end of the castle, the Inner Bailey. That's where the main residence is, impressive tower, chapels, that's where lords and ladies would live. And then you have this big Outer Bailey. I'm sure you're all familiar with the castle. It's a fantastic place to visit, and if you haven't been so, I would urge you go there. So I'm going to skip over this slide, because go straight to why we were there. So other than it just being a great place to work and bound to find lots of nice archaeology, in the dry weather, when it does happen sometimes, this outline of a building shows up in the Outer Bailey, just inside the main gateway there. So here you can see this photo taken by Toby Driver, who's up next. But the outline of a building shown in a bit more detail here. So there's something. It's a good sized building. It shows up very clearly. It looks like we're going to have some good survival of archaeology below ground, because it's showing up so clearly. So this. And then to skip back a bit to when restoration works were underway in the 1930s by Major Ivor Phillips, who owned the castle at that point. He came across and excavated the ruins in this corner. Now, unfortunately, what you see on the screen is pretty much all we know of what he found and what he did. But quite clearly, we've got substantial masonry remains. We can identify rooms, there's floor levels, there's a cesspit there, there's stairs. So there's going to be some good surviving buried archaeology there, we hope. But we don't quite know exactly what it is he found and what condition he left it in. So that and what was showing up in the crop marks has prompted a whole series of further investigations. So starting here in 2016, those geophysical surveys carried out throughout the castle. So we have on the left, the magnetometry survey, on the right, resistivity survey, so using different techniques, which added to the picture of what we thought we had. But as you can see, I've circled the area of the building. It's not particularly pinging out but it did tell us a bit more, allowing us to draw a sort of rough outline of what we thought we had there. This allowed people like Neil to take a deeper dive into it and try and come up with an idea of what we think this building represents. So what we think it is this winged hall house. So in the centre you have a big hall, big open hallway, flanked by these two wings. So here at Pembroke, we think at the bottom end we have the kitchen range, the services range, and we think that's there because the photos and the geophysics seem to suggest we have this big block of masonry in the middle, so that's a good place for, we might have some ovens, fireplaces, things like that. At the other end, we have the private apartments, the parlour and the solar. And then we seem to have this possible passageway at the bottom end of the hall, this annex out the back on the right here, where we think it's a good place for the cesspit. And then this seemingly detached building out the back. Now, hall houses of this type, they tend to start to appear in about the 14th century, run through to the 17th century. So that's what we thought we were dealing with. And then in 2018, James Meek and Neil then opened up a couple of trenches to have a look. And as you can see, straight away, down to some substantial archaeology, big, thick, chunky walls, and a good preservation of interesting stuff to look at. So what we have here is, let's say the 2018 things. So we're on the right, bottom on the right here, we have the annex on the right-hand side. And this big chamber that we think is a good candidate for a cesspit. I think the stuff inside it wasn't particularly cessy, if that's a word. But it's still a good candidate. And then just beyond it is a narrower chamber that seemed to be full of a lot of kitchen waste, a lot of bone, things like that. Beyond that, we have a stone-floored passageway and a stairway next to it in a big chunk of masonry here. What Neil calls a helical stair. So it's not quite a spiral stair. It just sort of curves up onto the next floor. So we've got a two-storey building. And also, interestingly, sat underneath this was a layer that contained Roman material. It doesn't like the Romans, obviously. That was interesting. We had sort of mid to late Roman material, and in fact the only radiocarbon date we managed to get from this was a 4th century date. So evidence of Roman occupation underneath this medieval castle. The other trench was at the northern end of the building, a bit more straightforward, massive chunk of masonry, more than enough to hold a couple of stories. On the right here, we've got the exterior stone cobbled sort of surface to the outside. On the inside, we have a mix of sort of demolition material and sort of disturbed deposits inside. So this is, there we are. Just to give you an idea of the sort of scale of the building that we're dealing with here. This is sort of the excavated evidence, and some of the crop maps sketched on top. So the work in 2018 was great, but it didn't really prove that we had this medieval hall house. It didn't quite unravel how it all functioned, how it was laid out. Didn't disprove it either, but it meant we wanted to go back and have a better look. And the important thing about these sorts of houses is that they're very rare in this part of Wales, which in a way is its indication that it's a high status building. But then why have we got a high status detached building in the outer bailey of a castle? Generally, this is the lower status part of a castle. You'd think they would stick it up in the inner bailey, where you'd expect accommodation like this to be. but maybe that's because Pembroke Castle is different. Maybe the Outer Bailey was always a gentrified, high-status area from the beginning. Maybe we just haven't looked at Outer Baileys in this sort of detail before. We don't understand how they work. So more reason to have a good look at this site. And also the date is going to be crucial as well, because Pembroke Castle is famous for being the birthplace of Henry VII in 1457. Now, hall houses, I say they didn't start to appear in the 14th century. In Wales, they're more mid-15th century. That's when we begin to see them. But again, not really in this part of Wales, but where they do appear, mid-15th century. So if at the moment there's a tower next to the site where it's called the Henry VII Tower, and it's laid out as the birthplace, the chamber in there is a birthplace of Henry VII. But if this building is of the right age and was there in the mid-15th century, then surely if you've got a brand new luxury building right there, this is a much better candidate for high status visitors, and somewhere where he's more likely to be born. So, fast forward on quickly because I'm bound to overrun. Here we are, starting our excavation work. There's Tom there, adopting a suitable supervisory pose. So I'm going to start with the trench on the right. So this is where we're looking at what we thought might be kind of an outer yard area between the main hall and a detached building, hoping to catch a spiral stair that seems to be showing up and part of the hallway, and possibly the north wall of a central passageway that runs through. That's a blurry photo. Anyway, I've outlined the walls that we did find. So on the left there, we have the outer edge of the main hall building running across the trench, as expected. Next to it, the start of our stairs. Great. Then we have this sort of dog-legged bit of wall, which is a bit of a surprise. We weren't really expecting a wall at that point. And then along the bottom of the trench, we have the northern edge of that annex building with the cesspit in that we picked up in 2018. What this also shows is the dark soil of where Ivor Phillips carried out his excavations. That's all 1930s material. So to focus in a bit more detail, this is the wall of the hall. Nice big chunky block of masonry as expected. On the west side, the face of it was plastered. So that's this side. So that's the interior side, all as expected. But what we didn't expect was the fact that it's a two-phase wall. So this hall wall is actually tagged on to an earlier wall, that dogleg wall we saw earlier. So a bit difficult to pick out on these photos, but on the bottom left there, that's the side of the wall, and you can see the vertical line where the two have been joined together. This is our stairway. So it's beginning to starts to curve off to the left, then curves back round to the right. And at the bottom here, we've got the cutouts for the door jamb. At the bottom, the floor that would have sat in front. We've got sort of the foundations of it, but the floor itself has gone. Moving on to that dogleg wall. So this is an earlier wall. Another reason why we think it might be earlier is because on the south side of it, we were picking up some quite nice stonework on the corners. It looks like it would have looked like a decent wall, but then it was largely blocked when they put this annex in with the cesspit in, obscured it and created a little sort of chamber in between the two. which is incidentally was filled with lots of nice roofing material, a demolition deposit of purple and grey slates and these beautiful glazed late medieval ridge tiles, roof tiles, so which matched up with what we found in 2018. So most, if not all, of the building would have had this lovely slate and glazed tile roof, another indicator of a high status building. The other thing about this wall, the reason it was dog-legged is because in that recess was a fireplace. Again, it's difficult to see from the photos, but we have in the bottom right there, you can see the stone hearth of the fireplace jutting out. And all that we were left with are the mortared masonry of the back of the fireplace. Any nice facing stones or designs or anything like that had gone. But some of these stones were heat reddened. So we've got this large fireplace. And obviously that means you wouldn't be heating an outer yard. So what we had on the north side of it was actually internal. So we had this big earlier building room behind what we thought was the hall house. Going back into the main hall of the hall house, it was filled with this rubble and mortar material. We weren't sure if this was because of what had been happening in the 1930s or was part of the demolition material, so we put this sondage, this small trench in to have a look. And we're fairly sure this is demolition material from the original demolition, which we think was around the mid-17th century, so some Civil War time, whether it was cleared as part of the defences of the Civil War or part of the slighting afterwards, we don't know. We haven't analysed any of the finds yet, so hopefully we'll get more information as we go through that. The floor of the hall, we could see where it was. You can see the impressions of the stones in the mortar bedding. The stones themselves had been robbed out. But underneath the floor, we had limestone bedrock. But in between the two, we had this relatively thin layer of dark soil that also partly run under the foundations of the walls as well. And this was, from this, we were getting more Roman material. So again, black burnished ware, mortaria, all mid to late Roman material, matching up nicely with what we found in 2018, but it looks like we've got quite an extensive area of late Roman occupation in Pembroke Castle, underneath all this medieval activity later on. Skipping on to our other trench. So here we were looking at what we hoped would be the entranceway into the building and looking at this big block of masonry that we hoped would have evidence of the kitchens and the ovens, fireplaces, something like that, something to confirm our layout and understanding. We had to abandon the bottom end, the southern end there, because there was an electricity cable running through. So unfortunately that restricted us slightly, but I don't think it would have told us anything we didn't find out from what we did open up in the end. Now in the end we did find good evidence of the entranceway. I'm not sure my lines help on this one, but on the left-hand side you're looking south down the trench, so at the bottom end you have the end of the front wall of the hall running north-south. Then you have a gap, and then you have an east-west wall, and in between you have this stone-laid surface which matches up with the passageway found in 2018. Beyond that, things start to get a bit messed up. It's obviously been cleared all right down to its floor levels and its foundation levels. It gets very disturbed, but so we kind of lose the rest of the wall further down. But behind it, we have this what we thought was a block of masonry. It's actually this nicely laid stone surface, not the fireplaces and the ovens we were hoping for. That would be too simple. But we have this nice surface that sort of fans out, and then it gets very disturbed. And what we thought was a big spread of rubble. We weren't sure if this was, again, part of the 1930s landscaping works clearing across the site. So one of our volunteers, Hannah, a few of the volunteers actually had an unenviable task of clearing away this rubble, which then left us with the final surprise on the site. So a few voids started appearing. Then, as we went into it, we realised what we had was this beautifully preserved, largely intact, barrel-vaulted cellar underneath. So, yeah, it's a lovely surprise. Everyone loves a cellar. But what this, the back wall, so behind the camera, has collapsed. And there's material covering the floor, but otherwise it looks in fairly good nick. What the opening is at the back, I don't know. It doesn't seem to go back very far. So at first I thought maybe we had a series of cellars, but actually it only seems to go back about 0.5 metre and then angles off slightly. But this form of cellar is, it's not too uncommon. You can see examples of this in other buildings in Pembroke. Again, late medieval, throughout the post-medieval period. This photo I just stuck in case the video didn't work. That's a sort of close-up of that opening at the back there. Yes, to start answering some of the questions we had, start with the easy one. We were fairly confident we can identify what is showing up in these photos of the 1930s, what Ivor Phillips came across, what he found and what he left behind. So there, the photo on the left, you can see the chamber in the foreground, that's the cesspit, with behind it, a rubbish pit for what we think the kitchens. Then behind that is our hall wall and the dogleg wall with a fireplace in behind that. And then in the other photo, we have our stairs in there, and the wall to one side, and the other stairs we found in 2018. But also, this has been skimmed off further than what shows up in the photos, so there's another chunk taken off when they landscaped it. But the harder question is what this means for the actual building itself. So this is a kind of the plan we had going into it with the 2018 excavations overlaid in blue. I've adjusted this slightly, the big caveat being that I promised I'd run this through with Neil before I did this talk. I haven't. So these ideas could change dramatically depending on the thought he gives to it. He is the expert. But it's not changed much. But at the back here is obviously an enclosed building, not a yard, and an earlier building. And I've kind of put kitchens in there because I did wonder whether or not it got reused when they put the whole building on one end, whether they reused it as the kitchens, largely because we do have this rubbish pit to the south of it with all the kitchen waste in, so the kitchens must be somewhere close by. We have this passageway that runs through it. We didn't find the north wall of that, which Neil was quite hopeful we would find, but we didn't find any evidence of that. It could have been robbed away entirely. And there must have been some division there because the floor levels were different. The passageway was higher than the hall. And the floor levels we found in the block at the south end were slightly higher still. Now the reason I've kind of think that might not be the kitchens now is because of these floor levels. In medieval buildings, height was a good indicator of status. So literally, the higher you went in the building, the higher your status. and the highest floor levels we have are at the south end. It may not have been as important by the time this was being built in the late medieval period, but still it's something to think about. How the cellar fits in, what that means to it all, I don't know. I'm going to have to let Neil give that some thought and come back to me, but I've dotted in the rough outline of the cellar, and that's at an end. So that opening at the top there seems to open to the exterior of the building somehow, either to provide light, ventilation, something like that, I'm not sure, or maybe to access for whatever they were storing in the cellar. Just quickly in terms of being able to date what we have, structurally, architecturally, it still all fits into this idea of a 15th, 16th century building. It fits quite comfortably with what we have. In terms of actual artefacts, the material we're going through, as I say, we've not analysed them yet, but what the material we're pulling it out of was demolition material that was disturbed in the 1930s, so everything's all mixed in together, so it's really difficult to get something that would specifically date construction or even use. But we had pottery from 13th century all the way through to the 20th century, and then we'd have in amongst this, interesting finds like the roof, the glazed roof tile, just in front of the fireplace, we had this nice pewter spoon, sort of, I think 16th century. Just in front of the entry, we had a lovely little collection of about 20 or so lead musket shot balls. It almost looked like someone had dropped their pouch. They're about right for the sort of Civil War period. But yeah, it looked like someone had sort of dropped their pouch of musket balls and then it scattered amongst the cobbles, and they just thought, oh, sod it, we'll come back to that later. And then all the way through to, we had nice collections of modern coins, but from a little collection from around the First World War, another collection from around the Second World War, so presumably when troops were stationed here as well. The one thing we didn't have was that nice silver baby rattle engraved with Henry Tudor. But maybe next time. So draw it to a close there. Thank you very much.